Hello, Fountain Church. We were confronted in the Word this week with this difficult command to love your neighbor as yourself, that we owe one another in Christ this debt of love, and that being a debt that we'll never repay. Lord willing, there will be a day that you and all of us will say that, I owe no more money on my home or whatever, but there will never be a day in God's economy that I'll be able to say to you as a brother or sister in Christ, I don't owe it to you to love you. And yet we grapple with our inability to obey that command, our struggles with obedience to that end. And so we ask the important question this week: where does the power come from to obey the commands of the law? Where does the power come from to do what the law expects of us? And we saw very frankly and very pointedly that the power rests in the person and work of Jesus. That the law does not simply exist to drive us to Christ so that we may be converted, but that even after conversion, the law exists to drive us to Christ that we may be sanctified. And it's important here to note that our sanctification, our growth in holiness, does not make our justification more secure. It doesn't add anything to our salvation, and yet it's vital for our obedience to the living God. And so we saw this week that if we are going to love our neighbors as ourselves, which we should be concerned with doing, the answer for how to do that does not lie in being more aware of that commandment. None of our failure to love is a result of our ignorance that we should be loving. Rather, it's a result of looking to the wrong source for power. And so, friends, I pray that by God's mercy, we may together look to Christ. We may see Him and ask our Father in heaven to grant us the power we need, to give us the Son, that we may obey. So I want you to go to your community groups. I want you to take that time seriously. When you're asked that question, how have you struggled this week? Perhaps you're having a hard time coming up with something to say because it's all new. Well, I can almost guarantee that you can say this: I failed to love my neighbor this week. And so I need you to help me see the gospel. And lastly, I would want to recommend a resource to you. This book, The Whole Christ by Sinclair Ferguson, beautifully captures this tension between law and gospel and how Christians should relate to both, and what is the role of God's grace in our lives, and what is the role of God's law in our lives. And so it's a little academic for the average church member, and yet not out of your reach. And so I would highly encourage you to read that book, take it seriously, let the wise exhortations of Sinclair Ferguson drive you all the more to the gospel of grace and the inspired word. Amen.